What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lumix Live. We've got some more of a casual conversation. So after last week's discussion on just video generals with the Lumix cameras, I wanted to just kind of carry that forward and do one on the photography side. Ironically, a lot of questions came up over the last week, specifically about things like native ISOs and how they interact on the cameras in the Lumix system that utilize dual native ISO, and even stuff down into different aspect ratios of the camera shoot, how our cameras function when you're wanting to shoot in different aspect ratios but still maintain the raw files, and so on and so forth. So I kind of felt like, this would be a fun stream, and with the sense that I got from last week, people seem to really like these slightly more casual streams where we kind of just go back and forth and I answer your questions and I show you some cool stuff on the cameras. So we're going to take it a little bit lighter and easier today, and kind of continue on with that, kind of topic. So these are our, as I punch my microphone again, still getting used to the new microphone setup. If you're new to these weekly streams, these are broadcasts that we do every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and they're specifically designed for all of you, the community, and just so that everybody can have a location and a community platform where you can share ideas, interact with other creators that are photographers, videographers, you name it, and just have this community, have a chat every single week. Sometimes we bring on guests, different filmmakers, photographers, different members of the company to come in and answer questions for you. And a lot of times we just kind of go through, provide some cool tips and tricks and how to use some of our products. And we just kind of go from there. So if you have questions for this week's broadcast, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras before it. So just start typing at Lumix Camera, and then I can see it on my side and we can go through some of those questions. Even though today is going to be primarily about photography, feel free to ask about anything Lumix camera related at all. That's kind of the point of these broadcasts. So let's see. A couple questions come in already before I go into some of the rest. What camera am I filming with right now? I use the BS1H with the 35mm f1.8. It is at f1.8, and we broadcast, I think it's set out right now at 4K 60p, I think it's 4K 60p. So, and our broadcasts are in 4K now. So we broadcast in 4K 60p onto YouTube. So if you want to, when I start showing stuff like Lightroom and some of the other stuff, if you want to see a better quality of it, make sure to go down into the little gear icon and up the quality as long as you've got your streaming capabilities for that. Before we go too far into the topic, I want to remind everybody about Lumix Pro Services. We have the red and platinum tier here in the United States. The red tier is free if you've purchased a Lumix camera. Make sure to take a look at the link on the screen or down in the description. That gets you your 3-year extended warranty and all that kind of fun stuff. But you also have a lot of other benefits as well. So you have the opportunity within the platform to upgrade to the platinum tier, which if you're someone who likes a better support system behind you, so you may be a professional working in the wedding industry or event or whatever, and you know that you need a good backbone of support for your equipment, make sure to check out the platinum tier. That gets you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. You get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you happen to drop something and break it, you know that you're covered at least for some of the damage costs there. You also get annual sensor cleanings, maintenance level type stuff. And then if you're someone who definitely prefers speaking to someone on the phone to troubleshoot problems, you've got access to our membership hotline, so you can actually call in and speak to someone within business hours on the East Coast of the US. What else am I missing? The Platinum tier also has a pretty cool welcome gift. It's got a nice Peak design customized strap for you, so if you're someone who likes to get a better strap than what comes in the box, you've got a Peak design strap that comes with the anchor solution and everything if you're already invested into the Peak design ecosystem. So let's see. So let's kind of just jump into this. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit more casual. We're just going to be chatting about a couple things that came up over the last week about photography and how to use our cameras. But let's see here. Jeff says, just an opportunity to say thanks for your advice about moving on from bridge cameras, loving your G9 and all the lenses too. That is awesome. I love hearing feedback of, people kind of moving up through the ranks in the cameras. If you ever are super excited and you want to show off some of the photos and videos that you capture, tag us over on Instagram and Facebook and all those different platforms. We're at Lumix USA in most of those. We would love to see the stuff that everyone creates with your cameras. So let's see here. Pete says hi. How's it going, Pete? Enrique, Sacred, seeing a couple familiar faces. Dave's new camera question mark? Nope, not this time. Let's see here. Features we can see in a Mark II. Don't know. Give us suggestions that you'd like to see in future cameras. EH says, I asked a while back about the extended digital focus assist on the GH6 from 6 to 20 and didn't get a clear answer if that was a feature coming back. Any updates? At this point, I don't have any updates on whether or not the zooming functionality is going to, like the focus assist zooming will go out to 20. My understanding is that because it's a totally new processor, it's a totally new engine across the board, some of that stuff may take longer, but I honestly don't have a clear answer as like a yes or a no if 20 times punch in is going to come in that. So right now it's at the 6. If something does come up, know that obviously we will talk about it here, and we'll, there'll be releases that come with the firmware updates and all that kind of stuff. So I will keep my ear to the ground and see if I can get you answers as time moves on and as we get closer to, future firmware updates, stuff like that. Let's see here. I was just talking to someone about my G9 and its native ISO is 200. Yep. Well, its base ISO is 200, and that's one of the things I want to recover today that we talked about last week as well. Peter says, I was wondering what AF settings would work best for low light venues. I find mine hunting too much, and I miss so many part photos when the DJ has lights set low. You use an S5 and a G9. That is actually something I'm probably going to take a look at. Let's see here. Suggestions. I could spend an hour on that. Yeah, no, but this is the platform. If you have suggestions, drop them in the chat. That's exactly what, this is a platform where we do read those comments and give some information back. Let's see here. Can you share what are the plans of Lumix in regards to MFT photography? At least a hint. Some people worry Micro Four Thirds is going to be like 80% video, 20% stills. This is actually a funny kind of, I think, logic that's grown. And it's because of how Lumix just is in the industry, right? We are known as a video forward company. Our capabilities in the cameras, that's always where we've been pushing the furthest and, the next best thing. And a lot of that comes from, if you look at how the market, as in like photographers and videographers and the customers that a lot of, kind of pro market has, you have to look and see what it is that the vast majority of people are asking for. Yes, there's our hobbyist side and our professional, photography side, but you start to look and say, what is the market asking for? The market has been asking for the last probably five or 6 years better and better video functionality built into cameras. People want to be able to take a mirrorless camera and not have to necessarily take their larger, higher end cinema cameras onto a set. You want to be able to do it with one camera. And truth be told, it's relatively easier to push the bounds in the video side than it is necessarily in the photography side. Because when it comes to the photography side, what really is there to improve, right? Not to diminish that there aren't things to improve in photography. There are always things that you can marginally improve in photography. Low light performance, focusing speed, accuracy for focusing, different types of modes that you can shoot in. Do you want to shoot in high resolution mode? Do you want to use more live view composite? Or does it really just come into, do you want better detection in autofocus settings and stuff like that? So as far as, when we look at Micro Four Thirds and our full frame system, both series are continuing. There is no stop in either of those cameras. So just because we're pushing harder with the video side really is just because that's what the market's asking for. On the photo side, there are major improvements that have been happening. The thing is that they're not usually headlined things that people see. So as far as photography updates, cameras like the GH6. The GH6 it's the first camera in the Lumix lineup that supports handheld high-resolution shot mode, which is, again, it's a first for Lumix, not necessarily first in the industry, but it's the first in Lumix. It has infinitely better motion correction than the competition out there. So you've got these features and these capabilities that are updating specifically for photographers that most media, because they know that we're more of a video-focused company, they usually don't give it as much attention as I think, personally, as I think probably should be given to them, because it is a feature in the photography side. It is development there. Things like newer sensor tech, as newer sensors are produced and as newer technologies are deployed into sensor development, you'll see marginal gains in the photography side. Basic things like ISO performance and resolution, they do come with time, but they're never going to be huge generational jumps unless you have a massive change to the underlying core technologies that work to create the photos. So there's a lot of stuff that you kind of see coming. Namely, everyone likes to say, like, we want more AI processing with photo and videos, and that is great. And it's cool when you see things like in, like what the phones can be doing for multi-image processing and stuff like that. That kind of stuff, will it ever come to photo cameras, dedicated photo cameras? I honestly don't know. That's well above my pay grade. But what you do see coming is the more practical side of that kind of tooling. So using intelligent processing to create things like our live view composite, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which phones can't do. At this point, there is no phone I know that does any of this stuff, and I don't even know if they actually can do it because of the way their systems work. So, yeah, that's a bit of a diatribe on that. But as far as like an 80-20 split, I think it's just because right now GH is the primary camera that we've launched. So everyone really looks at that, and you really see the video functionality and the hybrid use cases for it. But the photography side is always still a core part of our business, and you're going to see cool things as we continue to go forward. They may not be gigantic generational jumps that you see, but that's true for every camera brand. Photography is basically at this point where you're refining everything and you're making it more usable, faster frame rates, faster autofocusing, better detection for subjects, better compatibility system-wide for lenses. And that's an advantage that Lumix has over basically every other lens mount in full frame, especially. We have the Oman Alliance. We've got Sigma, Leica, Panasonic are all first-party members of that. So it's not the logic years ago of taking a quote-unquote third-party lens and putting it on, and you have to sacrifice things. You really don't do that on our side. In the Micro Four Thirds world, it's kind of the same thing. You've got the entire Micro Four Thirds ecosystem where you've got lenses across the board from Panasonic, or Panasonic Lumix. You've got our Leica series lenses, which would be our top tier, our kind of premium class lens. You've got Olympus lenses that can be thrown on there. You've got all of these different third-party manufacturers making them as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff being added in with all this stuff. Wow, we are getting, let's see here. Hang on one second, people. We're going to put that person in timeout. Cool, yeah, so lots of questions came in there between then and now. So let's see here. High resolution mode fails mid-processing 100 to 300 Mark II lens on the GH6. Camera lens updated. Any advice? The biggest reasons for high resolution shot mode to not complete is that there is too much motion in the image. If you're doing tripod level work, so you're not using the handheld mode, you're using the standard tripod mode. Couple things that you can do there is make sure that you have it in mode 1, not mode 2. Mode 2 is for motion correction. And if for some reason the motion is too drastic, a high resolution shot mode will have difficulty combining those images to create a high res mode. If it's handheld, probably the biggest thing that you can do to kind of like increase your keeper rate there is to ensure that you're shooting at a much higher shutter speed or faster shutter speed. One of the side benefits of shooting in high resolution mode is that when you are taking multiple images together, you can shoot at higher ISOs and still get a cleaner image than a single image at that same exact high ISO. So don't be afraid to push your ISO higher than you would normally think, especially in high resolution mode. And on the GH6, I just pin it all the way to the top, basically, because one, you're getting a much bigger bit depth file than you do with a standard image, and you're combining all of those images together, which inherently reduces noise anyway. So those are probably two things I would try, and just kind of make sure that you've got, kind of that stuff set up. With the 100 to 300, you want to remember that it's usually keeping that one over your focal length for shutter speed. Yes, you have image stabilization, but you have to remember in high resolution mode, you don't have an active stabilizer like you would think you have for a single shot, because that stabilization unit is being used for high res. So on a 100 to 300 at 300 millimeter, I would typically suggest you want to keep yourself as close to a 1/600th of a second shutter speed as you can. Anything faster than that's going to be better, to try to really make sure that you get those sharp images across the board, so that the processor has enough information to compile those into a high resolution shot image. Let's see here. DJ Electric says, does Lumix still believe in the future of stills on Micro Four Thirds in your opinion? Asking, considering the state of Micro Four Thirds based on Lumix stills focused bodies lately. Yes, 100%. I believe in the future of stills for Micro Four Thirds. There's no question in that. And we as a company have stated that before too. Just like I was saying before, yes, video is the kind of major spotlight of what is always being updated in cameras, but that's because that's what the market is asking for as a whole. Obviously this group is a bit different than the whole. So a lot of media and stuff like that tends to pick up all the video stuff, primarily because we live in a world where Instagram stories, Instagram reels, Facebook live, YouTube live, all this kind of stuff. This is where the vast majority of people are having to develop content for customers and viewers and for fun. Photography, yes, it is a core base of what we do with our cameras. It's kind of what a mirrorless camera is. The video stuff, it's just easier to see the development process in video as it is compared to stills. Because there's only a couple things that you can upgrade there. But it is a core, especially in Micro Four Thirds. Just because you're seeing GH cameras and very heavily video-focused cameras come out now does not mean that is the future for everything. Just sit tight. Know that when there are updates, we will let everybody know, obviously. So yeah, that's kind of the state of it, DJ. Let's see here. On some of the last streams, you mentioned the hot swapping lens is bad only for dust on sensor due to static electricity. Is there any other concern? Yeah, I mean, there's other concerns too. In any situation with any electronic device, typically you want to make sure that you power the camera off, and change batteries, change lenses. If you're on a GH6 and you're using the SSD, like I talked about when we announced that firmware, it's best practice to turn the camera off, then pull the SSD off, then plug it in. But as far as like any actual damage that you can really cause, not that I'm aware of, but best practice is always going to be the recommended way that we always say, because you never know what can happen when your camera's turned on, because there is power running through the circuit boards, there's power running to the sensor. Unexpectedly disconnecting things from that is never a good thing. So that's usually the logic I take, and why I kind of push relatively hard on that. Just try to make sure your cameras are turned off. I've gotten to the point actually after that stream, really making sure that I ensure that my cameras are turned off when I swap lenses, even more than I used to. So, Trinimedia says, Panasonic released a new PL mount studio camera. Why not make it L mount better for the Lumix BS1H? Did we release a PL mount studio camera? Our broadcast division did, or maybe. I don't really follow too much on our broadcast division. There are certain things when it comes to lens mounts in different areas of business where you basically go with what the primary is. And if it's a broadcast camera, if it's one of our broadcast studio division cameras, PL is still the primary there, so that's usually why. If you look at cameras like the Vericam, you were able to do lens mount swaps on that camera. So in certain cases, it depends on when products were in development, when they started versus when they actually hit the market. But yeah, so that's just a bit of a difference. That would be a totally different division than us, though. So FC says, on the GH6 with SSD recording, we can shoot more raw photos before the buffer... wait, let me reread that question there. On GH6 with SSD recording, which can shoot more raw photos before buffer overrun and continuous shooting? Question mark. Internal CF or SSD recording? Oh, okay. I'm following the question now. So no, there's not really a change when it comes to the buffer side there, because the buffer is the internal memory and the internal storage. You're always going to be limited by what that is designed to be able to do, and then dump to the external storage. Most of the time, you're not limited by what the media speed is in cases like that, as long as it's on par with what the internal speed of that storage is for offloading. You're almost always limited by how fast the offload can happen. That's capped on the internal side, not on the external side. But that does bring up one of the kind of points that I wanted to bring up that actually got asked over the last week is, you know, with the SSD upgrade that came to the GH6, and when we talk about photography in the Micro Four Thirds world, you know, what does SSD bring? You know, everyone focused very heavily on the fact that it means that, you know, you can do ProRes, you can get much longer recording time in the video side, and that's great because that's the expected mentality of what an external SSD is going to give you when you attach it to a camera. But what hasn't really been talked about much, and that's actually on me for not talking about it much, is that the GH6 with your SSD recording also allows you to shoot your stills to the SSD as well. So you don't have to use SD or CF Express cards on the GH6 if you want to be prioritizing using an SSD for this. And there's a couple really good benefits for doing this as well. So if you're a time-lapse photographer, if you're someone who really needs to be able to capture thousands and thousands of pictures, and you want to be able to just set it up and run, and you don't want to have to worry about remembering to change cards or cutting the resolution down so that you can fill that number of photos onto a card, just use the SSD, because the SSD is at 1 terabyte or up to 2 terabyte, which is what the system is designed to be able to work with currently. You're able to actually just capture thousands or tens of thousands of photos on a single drive for things like time-lapse. Even just general shooting. I've actually found that with my GH6, I am rarely actually taking the SSD off of my GH6 anymore. Anytime that I'm using the camera, whether I'm shooting video or I'm shooting stills with the camera, it pretty much always has the SSD on it. And then all I do is I just pop my SSD off, plug it into a USB 10 gig port on my computer, and offload the files that way. It also tends to be faster than CF Express and SD cards. So this ends up actually being a really solid use case for even photographers that want to utilize a GH6 for that case, because it is the highest resolution stills capture in Micro Four Thirds right now also. Let's see here. Can shooting into the sun damage a camera or a camera's matrix? Yes, if you stop the lens down enough. It's the similar thing as to shooting, you know, you never really want to use a camera where you have laser lights. They can burn the sensor physically because depending on the aperture, the focus point of light, so on and so forth. You have to remember that every ray of light that's coming into the camera is being focused down into a pixel. So if you have a pinpoint of light, especially something like the sun, you should just never really shoot directly into the sun. The chances of something happening from it are relatively low because usually people are, you know, wide open and it's kind of just in the frame, but it's still not a good practice to do. You really don't want to shoot directly into the sun. And you usually also don't really want to have a camera laying down to where the sun is pointing right into the lens. In the film days, you used to melt film that way, and or the curtain for the shutter. Modern day cameras, you can damage the shutter if it's a camera that has a shutter that closes. Yeah, just basic practices you want to try to avoid. Let's see here. Reminder for drag to focus on the GH5 Mark II. Yep, we've got that added into there too. Let's see here. Can you comment? Is it possible to add AirPlay and Chromecast in future firmware updates? Probably not. Cameras across the board, and this is a safe statement, I think, to say for every camera manufacturer across the board. The processors are not designed like SoCs that you see in mobile devices, like, from Qualcomm or Apple or Exynos or any of those. They're completely different architectures. So things like Chromecast and AirPlay and stuff like that, yeah, it'd be cool to see them in cameras. And there were cameras years ago, I mean, we're talking 7, almost 10 years ago at this point, that attempted to do an Android ecosystem into a camera, but they kind of failed miserably, because you can be good at being a phone and processing a small image sensor. Once you start going up much larger than that, you run into other problems, battery life, things like that. But yeah, so within the current ecosystems on cameras across the board, you probably will never see AirPlay and Chromecast built into cameras like this, being able to cast your camera screen wirelessly. That also requires a ton of power and a ton of processing that typically you just don't have available to you in a camera. Let's see here. What is there to improve for a G9 or a G90 successor, you ask? Dual native ISO, PDAF, more resolution, better computational multi-exposure for extreme low light. Yeah, those are kind of those things that, we definitely want to see added there. So, let's see here. Richard Wong is here. Welcome. Welcome from New Zealand. Wow, what is it? We are getting... the chat is getting just like inundated with all these spam accounts. So anyway, taking a few time lapse. The last one I did my GH5 was a sunrise, over 7,000 raw photos. It's going to take time to process all those. Yes, what is cool though is that you can also process them quickly in camera as well. So we're going to put this user in timeout. We're also going. Sorry everybody. There's a lot of really annoying bots and crap in the chat here, so I just need to take care of some of this stuff. Okay. All right. Yeah, DJ Electric, you have an S1R. Good. So hopefully I just reported a couple of these messages. We'll get this stuff set out here. Report this. Sorry, everybody. This is the fun part of when it's only me doing this. So, all right. No, there's more of them. We're going to report this. We're going to be hide user. Remove. There we go. All right. All right. I think I'm caught up now. Hopefully that's kind of cleared out. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to do is actually, kind of take a look at my S5 here and answer some of those questions that we saw online. And I alluded to it before, and one of them was about ISO. Wow. Why are we getting so just inundated with spam? I'm going to have to get a moderator for some of this stuff eventually. We're going to hide this user too. All right. So, one of the things that we wanted to kind of talk about with the S5 in this case is what I'm using for this demonstration is one of the questions that came up about, native ISOs for the cameras. We have a bunch of cameras that we have a whole bunch of cameras that have the ability to use what's called dual native ISO. And when we talk to videographers, a lot of times it's relatively easy to understand what that kind of means, right? Dual native ISO means that you have two native ISO ranges to work with for, being able to get the best dynamic range and the best noise performance out of an image, whether you're doing whatever, video or stills. Well, if you've been using the Lumix cameras long enough, you know that some of those dual native ISO ranges change depending on what color profile you're actually shooting in. And when you use cameras that have the ability to select native ISOs, you can actually see this in play. So what I wanted to do is go through what those native ranges actually are on the different cameras. And we're going to use the two main ones, which would be Are you shooting in Vlog or are you shooting in a standard color profile? And standard color profiles in the Lumix cameras are everything outside of hybrid log gamma and the Cine-like color profiles. So what you basically see with this, right, is I'm looking at the camera right now. I'm in my Leica 709 color profile right now. I've got my focus, and I want to change my ISO. So if I just click the ISO button, you'll see that for one right here, I've got ISO set at 100, which is the lowest one that it shows. So on the S5, your native ISO for a low range is 100 ISO. That's going to get you the best dynamic range versus the best image, kind of cleanliness, so your noise profile. But there is a second native ISO that's built into this camera. If you're in the photography sense, if you're shooting and you want to be able to get the highest, performance out of it without necessarily adding a bunch of gain internally in the camera, you would actually roll this dial up to 640 ISO. Some users claim 800. On the spec sheet, on the actual documentation that we have, it is 640 is the second native ISO. So what does that mean in the photography sense? Well, it means that as you scroll up from 100 up to 640, you're going to see an increase in noise as you go up, but typically you're going to be able to go up to, up to 640, and then you'll see it actually clean and then go up a little bit higher, up to 800. So that's going to mean that as a still shooter, if you're a landscape shooter with a camera like the S5, shooting at 100 ISO is going to be perfectly fine. You're going to have no problems in dynamic range. You're not going to be clipping highlights, anything like that. But if you go up to 640 ISO or anything just slightly below that, that's where you're going to see that increase. Once you click over to 640 or up to 800, you'll actually see the noise will drop off and you'll gain back any of the dynamic range that's typically lost through noise increased in an image. Now, this differs when I come in here and I change this camera to Vlog. When I change the camera into Vlog, you'll notice that my lowest ISO now is only 640, and I haven't changed anything else about this. So your lowest native ISO in this case is 640. So you can't go any lower. You can if you do an expanded range, but when you go lower than your native ISO, you're actually reducing your highlight information. So for Vlog shooters, it's 640. And if you've followed anything about how Vlog works in any of the full frame cameras and now in a camera like the GH6, you'll know that your next range is at 4,000. Now, an easy thing for anybody to see this with, if you want to be able to see where the point is that it changes yourself, is to take the camera, put a lens cap on it, go to that ISO, and then set it so that you have something like, I think the easiest way to do this would be to put focus peaking on, and then slowly ramp up through your ISO. You'll see that noise will be picked up as within focus peaking, which is typical. And as you raise that up, you'll see more and more noise, and then you'll just click over, and then you'll see that noise will grow. You click over to 4,000 ISO in Vlog, and then it drops off, and it's a clean image again. And then as you go up again, you see it kind of raise and raise and raise. On the still side, it's not as prevalent because you're only up to 640 ISO at that point, or 800 ISO, depending on who you ask. But again, in our documentation, it's 640. So that gives you that kind of benefit that if you want the maximum dynamic range and the maximum exposure capability out of this camera, you shoot at those native ISOs. There is also some of the other things that you can do with this when you're on the photography side. What it means for some users, it means that you can actually shoot to protect your highlights when you're working with any of these stills cameras when you're on a base ISO or a native ISO. So I can set my camera to 640 ISO when I want to shoot at night and know that as long as I shoot to where my highlights are properly, kind of going to be properly exposed, I can shoot that image, bring it into my computer, and then I can raise my exposure in post, and it's going to give me the same results that I get when I bring it and actually shoot it at those ISOs in the camera. You do trade off a little bit when you start shooting and editing that way. One, you don't actually see necessarily the image as clear because you're looking at a relatively really dark and underexposed image, and then when you boost it in post, you actually start to bring the image back in. The other thing that you end up actually kind of not necessarily losing out on, but shifting a bit, is any of the noise reduction that's applied for things like long exposure work, or even just in general high ISO noise reduction that's done in an image. In the camera, it's profiled based on how the camera works, the characteristics of the sensor, the profile, things like that. When you go into software like Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One or anything like that, and you're using this way to shoot, you do typically have to add some noise reduction to the image because you're not having anything that's actually built in with the images themselves. Now, in the full frame cameras, we've got 14-bit RAW files, so you've got a lot of flexibility to work with on those images in post. You have a lot of bit depth there. You've got a lot of tonality that you can pull out of those images. So you can shoot this way. It's just going to depend on your particular style of shooting. The other area, and let me see if I can demonstrate this here, is if I go to, let's change this to Cinelike D2, and when I go into the ISOs, you'll see now that my lowest ISO is down to 200. So Cinelike D2 and Cinelike V2 are going to have a 200 ISO as your low range, and I believe it's 2500 as the higher end, or 1250. But again, if you ever want to actually see these for yourself, you can do a lens cap test and actually be able to see that noise change and grow to figure out what ISO is going to be best for you when you work with it. Ultimately, for the vast majority of users, when you're out there and you want to work with a camera and you want the best overall image quality out of it, unless you are working in a situation where you need to be putting an image in post and pulling that image or lifting those shadows by like 3 or 4 stops, it's probably better to just raise your ISO. And yeah, you're going to lose maybe a little bit more of your highlight, but you're going to gain your shadows back, and you're going to find a good middle ground as to what's going to give you the best image out of it. Let's see here. We can go back in and answer some more of these questions now that it seems like the bots have calmed down a little bit here. I'm not saying that it's spam from anybody else. Let's see here. Villano, ever going to get an update for the S5 to record ProRes into an SSD? No, the S5 does not support the hardware needed to do SSD recording. SSD recording came with the GH6, which is based on an entire new platform for the processor as well as hardware that's used for this. So previous cameras, unfortunately, they don't have the required equipment. The other thing, too, that I have to remember is I think the USB port on the S5 is not a 10 gig port, which is another thing that's needed. So hardware-wise and just general tech-wise, the S5 won't support SSD recording. Let's see here. Dennis says, usually trying to underexpose my S1H at native ISO and push shadows in Lightroom or Luminaire. Still have super clean shadows, but no clipping highlights. The 14-bit readout really does help. Yeah. Certain cameras, like for those that have followed a long time know that I'm a big fan of the S1R when it comes to photography. I have 2 of them here. I've got one that's just standard, and then I have one that I've got full spectrum converted. Those images, you can actually like lower your ISO down past 100. You can bring it down to 50. And the S1R with that particular sensor has some additional benefits, actually, if you bring it down to 50, because you're not clipping your highlights. So for still shooting, it actually really gives you a huge benefit to be able to underexpose a bit, bring your shadows up. That 14-bit file, as Dennis points out, really does like massively give you a solid benefit for how much detail you can really pull out of these images, and especially how much wow, let's hide this. Wow, I don't get what is with these spam bots. Cool. I'll have to check with YouTube to see if there's anything I can do about that. Anyway, yeah, so there's a ton of dynamic range flexibility with the 14-bit RAW files that we have. Let's see here. Martin says, regarding different picture profiles and clipping points, i.e. 80 IRE, 90 IRE, none of this is in documentation for the GH6. Can Panasonic publish some documentation on Vlog or Cinelike D? I can check and see if there's anything that's published on it. But like we've said, for the GH6 in particular, the clipping point in Vlog is 80 IRE if you are shooting in non-dynamic range boost, and I believe it's 85 IRE if you are shooting in dynamic range boost. Cinelike D, because it's a 709 profile, it's your standard, 90%, 95%, that kind of thing. So. For example, the most popular Leeming LUT says GH6 is not supported for ETTR due to different clipping points. Officially, workaround is to disable DR boost in the GH6 to use a LUTs. The GH6 can ETTR. It's just that, whether or not you're using DR boost changes what the clipping point is for it, because DR boost provides an additional stop of highlight dynamic range. Let's hear. Rhett says, which series do you think is better for astrophotography, full frame or micro four thirds? This one's gonna be it's really more up to the user itself, right? So if I'm in the micro four thirds cameras, I will almost always reach for my GH5S if I want to do astrophotography. The low light performance on that camera with the dual native ISO performance on it and the lower pixel count, in general, I prefer the look out of that camera in micro four thirds for astro style photography. That being said, any of the cameras that support the live view composite functionality, I also have no problem shooting low light and astro work with those particular cameras. Because they've got the benefit of merging images together to create a longer exposure, which mitigates some of the high ISO challenges there. When it comes to full frame cameras, hands down, it's my S5, but I also legitimately have no problem shooting astrophotography with my S1R. There are things you can do to cameras. My converted S1R is a good example of that you can actually convert them to basically give you that better performance in low light by removing the hot filter, so the IR filter, and setting them up for astro. But that's really if you're dedicated into astrophotography. The S5 though gives me the biggest benefits for things like live view composite. I get my solid performance for ISO just because of the dual native ISO sensor, and it's a in my opinion, a preferred resolution to work with. I prefer working at 24 megapixel unless I'm doing something specialty, which is when I'll pull out the S1R and do 47 megapixel. So yeah, that's probably the benefits, the best of those categories there, in my opinion. The GH6 is also pretty good for astrophotography. Because you can use things like the high resolution shot mode for some of this stuff, which also gives you that benefit of shooting at higher ISOs, being able to merge images together, and reduce the noise that you get out of an image. So at that point, it's just being more creative with how you use your equipment. Yeah, let's see here. Pressure employers to release a successor to the GX80 or GX9. I don't know how much pressure I can put on them, but yeah, if the market's asking these questions, definitely just ask them there. Yeah, let's see here. False color, please. Even on Atomos monitors, false color does not support the different clipping points 9080 unless you bake the HDMI LUT in the GH6. Well, yeah. Let's see here. Have you tried any of the high resolution modes, such as... Oh, okay, yeah, and I answered that question. Okay, cool. So yeah, from some of the other cool photo features that, we've actually gotten some questions about here is, when we look at the different cameras that we have, and let me see. Okay, cool. My Lightroom is up. All right. So one of the other, questions that we've gotten actually a decent number of times asked about us is, I want to be able to shoot in different aspect ratios, and how does it work with a Lumix camera? Am I stuck shooting the aspect ratio that I photographed, or am I going to be able to, kind of fix it later? Well, with the Lumix cameras, and this has been a case for actually a really long time, whatever aspect ratio you select your camera to shoot in, you still have that full initial RAW file to work with. So I'm just going to pull this image up here. So this is an image that I shot in the 2:1 aspect ratio. So yeah, this is shot in the 2:1 aspect ratio that the camera has. So you have a couple of these different modes internally. And then what you have as an ability here is to actually go back into your cropping, and you'll see that it's set up by default here as shot. So this is how I shot it in the camera. I've got the framing, how I saw it on the day of shooting. But I still do have that full flexibility to go into the original and bring it out to the full height and width of that sensor. So I'm not locked into whatever aspect ratio I shot at. This also means that if I were to go in to shoot some different scenarios, like when I went on a road trip last year, I wanted to take advantage of the ability that our cameras have to shoot in a 65:24 aspect ratio. So those that came from film, you may recognize this. This is close to that original kind of X-Pan style. So it'd be two 35mm frames side by side to get you an ultra panoramic style shot. So I had the ability to just, with my camera, shoot in that particular aspect ratio and get very different looks to the images than you would have gotten if you were just shooting it in 4:3 or shooting it in 3:2. So the traditional mindsets that we think of for 35mm cameras. These also mean that for every single one of these images, I still had the ability with the RAW file to go in and recrop them, take the full range out of it. So if I wanted to do something in, say, 2:1 in 65:24 because I want that ultra wide angle field, I've got that flexibility with it, and I don't have to necessarily be stuck with one particular aspect ratio. So where you find that on the camera. So in our cameras, by default, you can do this right in the quick menu here. If you scroll down, you'll see the aspect ratios, right? So this is going to be more on the full frame cameras. The Micro Four Thirds cameras don't have the expanded ones, the 65:24. But, you know, I can set my camera up to shoot in 4:3, 3:2, 16:9. If I want to match a video output with the stills, I already know where that cropping is going to be. Even you have the, you know, the classic 1:1 if you want to shoot square and, you know, kind of have more of that film style to it. Or if you're just someone who likes to post it directly to things like Instagram or whatever, where square is still a pretty viable platform. But these are the two that actually provide some really cool aspects to shoot with that you typically don't see that often these days. It's a 2:1 aspect ratio and then the 65:24. Now, these do give you that full flexibility that I can just have my camera set up. I'm looking at it right here. I see how the shot's going to be, you know, taken. And then when I bring it into post, as long as I'm shooting raw, I'm able to just take it, put it in the software, and then I can pull it back out to the full 3:2 if I wanted to. And then same with 2:1. Now, 2:1 aspect ratio, if you are someone who is using this as a photography side, 2:1 aspect ratio actually can be worked well into platforms like Instagram or anywhere where you can do like a slide, because you can slice it up pretty comfortably into different frames and then load it onto the software or load it into the social platform you want to send it up to and have it sliced out properly. And then when you show it, it's actually properly wide. The other thing too is 2:1 aspect ratio. If you want to shoot more panoramic and you want to share them and you're someone who's still using Instagram as a stills, you know, kind of sharing platform, 2:1 is the widest aspect ratio that Instagram will let you use without automatically forcing you to crop off the sides of that image. So it's pretty fun to be able to just shoot in these different aspect ratios. And they lend themselves really well to different kind of environments. Like when I was in Utah last year, being able to shoot some of these canyons and stuff in that wider aspect ratio definitely gave me a much better feel than it did when shooting, you know, in a 4:3 or a 3:2 aspect ratio. I just felt that the images kind of lend themselves better to it. You know, even stuff like if you're at the Grand Canyon, and these are infrared photos, so these are the IR chrome or 850 nanometer. Shooting in that wide aspect, panoramic shot without having to necessarily stitch these in post can give you a really cool, distinct look that will in a lot of cases, let your images shine out over necessarily all the others that most people see. Because we're used to seeing in 4x3 and 3x2 images or 4x6 images, if you're printing them still. Shooting in these aspect ratios can really do a lot to bring your images forward and separate them from others that are shooting in maybe similar environments. It makes you also think very differently about composition when you are shooting in some of these different aspect ratios. So let's see here. Some of the other questions that came in here. Let's see here. Judging by the questions here on a photo-related stream, I understand Lumix. I understand the Lumix focus on video. All video questions. Yeah, video is just the dominant way that creators are delivering content these days. But photography is still a very core part of the business. And as long as I'm here, I'm always going to be pushing for photography because that's at my core. That's what I love. Let's see here. Will there be a successor to the 100 to 400? No idea, but you can always ask for one. Tenet says, honestly, it seems that Panasonic want to head that way. Actually, we're hybrid. That has always been our direction. We are not necessarily, one direction over the other. Hybrid and providing a camera for users that want to be able to do whatever they want to with it, that is the direction. That is our core kind of message moving forward with the cameras is you want to be able to pick up a camera and have the best of the video features and the best of the current available photo features as well in a single camera. Because most people are not using multiple cameras for different purposes that often anymore. You're showing up to a job and you've got a single camera and you can shoot some video, you can shoot your stills, you can provide them to everybody. That's really where, a lot of the future is with this. You got to have a product that's got enough for, the best of both worlds with it. Yeah. Let's see here. Could a firmware update provide live view composite to the G9? Honestly, I don't know. It's been so long that live view composite's been out and the G9's been out for so long. I honestly don't know if the G9 has all the hardware needed to do it at this point, which is why I don't think we've put it in there yet. But I'd have to actually talk with the engineers about that one. Richard says, I love the 65x24 aspect ratio. Brought your S5 with you at a recent holiday trip and shot almost all the photos in that. I saw that online. Yeah. Let's see here. Rhett says, does the GH6 have live view? Man, that would be great. Otherwise, back to the Mark II for that one. Yeah, the GH6 does not have live view composite. I don't know if that camera is going to get it. But yeah, at this point, if you need live view composite, you can go to the GH5 Mark II. FC says, I think I understand what live view composite photography is, but can you explain what advantage of live view composite over long exposure is? Yes, I can, FC. So, and I'm actually going to go to my Lightroom catalog for that one. So, live view composite photography. Basically, what this mode is it allows you to get an image like you see on the screen here in one shot. Up until recently, if you wanted to do an image like this, where you've got the actual stars in the sky, you've got the lighting under the bridge, and all of it is properly exposed, right? So the bridge is properly exposed, the sky is properly exposed, and I'm not overly blowing out any of the highlight regions that you see like down here. Up until recently, you would have to do 3 or 4 different photos to create this and then merge it on your computer to then create that image later. So what I mean by that is you'd have one image to capture the stars. You'd have one image to capture the lighting under the bridge. You'd have one image to capture the foreground, and then maybe you'd have another image to do the light trail that's running underneath this bridge. And that can be incredibly time consuming. We're talking in the scope of hours to do something like this, because if this shot up here is, say, an hour long to get the star trail, it's not really an hour long. I think it's like 20 minutes. If you wanted to do this, you'd have about 20, 30 minutes to get the exposure there. Then you wanted to do under here and have this properly exposed, you'd have a couple more minutes maybe, depending on what your ISO is, to be able to actually get this lit properly. If you're adding light in with a flashlight, that can speed this up. If you wanted to be able to get the light trails, that's another couple of minutes for this. And then you have to take all those individual images, bring them back home, and then you have to merge them together. but you're still going to have a couple major problems when you do it that way in a scenario like this. So I have these two street lamps here. These two street lamps in a long exposure are going to make this big halo right in this region here, right above those, which for some reason is my cursor's not showing up on the screen anymore. Right over in this region, you're going to end up having a halo of brightness because you get light bleed. The more light is being shown in a spot, pixels will start to pick that up. And then you don't get this like kind of real crisp set of stars right in the same area as the street lights. What Live View Composite does is lets you pick the brightest point in the image and set your exposure to start for that. So when I took this image, my brightest point in the frame were these two lights. So I took a test shot, and the exposure, as you can see here, was ISO 1600, and it was 2.5 seconds for the image. That was the initial base image, which means that all of this in the foreground was near pitch black. The only things that were really ever exposed properly were the areas where the light is directly hitting onto, and it had just enough to kind of like show in the frame. Well, what you do with Live View Composite is you just click the shutter. It does a dark frame based on that 2.5 seconds at ISO 1600 because you're merging a whole bunch of those images together. And then you just click the shutter and let it go. And you actually watch on the back of the camera as this image builds up. So I was able to see the stars actually go from pinpoints to start to rotate and actually create star trails. I was able to see that when a car was about to pass by, I was able to see that car, coming through the frame and actually creating that light trail through. And the thing that you have to remember with this too is that because you're doing a 2.5 second exposure, it's a long exposure, which means motion is only picked up if the subject is within the frame for 2/3 of the exposed time, or 1/3 of the exposed time. I forget if it's 1/3 or 2/3. But ultimately, that means that instead of spending, say 2 hours to create this image on site, and then another 2 hours at home to put it into Photoshop, edit the photos, merge them, mask out all these different little areas that I want to kind of balance the exposure in, it just literally took me the 2 hours of sitting on site, clicking the shutter button, letting it run through, and then getting the raw file that I can then bring into here and work with on this computer to be able to say like, okay, I want to change the color profile. I want to shoot this and see what it looked like in Vivid. That is what Live View Composite does, is it gives you that huge flexibility for night style shooting, or if you're someone who likes to do light painting, where you want to do like, trace your subject or add a different kind of flare and pop to your image by adding lights into it. That's what this allows you to do. But the key benefit here is that you watch it build on the screen instead of having to shoot it, wait for the shutter to stop, then go back and review the image. Did it work right? And then have to reshoot it. You can stop it when the image is the way you want it to be. So hopefully that kind of explains what Live View Composite is. I know that that's a relatively in-depth discussion about what Live View Composite is, but yeah. Let's see here. Is it possible to use HDMI output on photo mode to preview last photo while LCD screen operates normally with Live View for the next photo? Not in the current way that the system works. If you plug a display into the camera while you're shooting and then you click playback, it's actually going to go into the playback mode for showing the images on the display, because you have separate controls for how the camera operates when you're in the photo mode out over HDMI. So you won't always be able, like you won't be able to be shooting and have the previous image displayed over HDMI. That is a good suggestion though, and it is something that we will bring up to those team. I don't know if they've got any clear straight up capability to do it. I would have to ask them about it. Damien says, did you change something about your lighting setup? Yes, I lowered these lights. I brought up my exposure a little bit so that there should be more separation in my shirt. Actually, feedback from last week's stream. Let's see here. What camera and lens used here in the stream you shooting? Michael, what camera and lens are you using here in the stream that's shooting you? Looks like the AF is performing great. I use a BS1H and the 35mm f1.8. And I'm in 60 frames per second with face and eye detection. And yeah, it's an autofocus. So yeah, the focus works fine for this. Let's see here. Came to the stream late. I'm happy with my G9 and Micro Four Thirds, but when I replace and upgrade, I don't want a video-centric camera with no provisions for a battery grip like the GH6. So understand that the GH6 is a very specific kind of upgrade. Just because that camera doesn't have a battery grip does not necessarily mean that we're never making battery grips anymore. The S5 has a battery grip. The G9 has a battery grip. If we ever replace those cameras, I would plan on hoping that we would have a battery grip for them as well. So I really wouldn't take the fact that one camera in our lineup no longer had a battery grip as a sign that future cameras will not have them. There are specific reasons why the GH6 does not have a battery grip, and it really came down to that category of camera, the GH5. When you look at the development, a vast majority, and I mean a vast majority of users, did not use battery grips on that camera, or at least they weren't purchasing them from us. The camera also has the ability to be able to use external power solutions now, so the DCC adapters or USB, which typically when you're putting them in a rig, no one really made rigs for battery grips anyway. They were there for a little bit and then they disappeared quickly. So you have cages that are built for cameras without the battery grip, and then you now have external power solutions that are relatively available, like actually really easily available. Stuff like these V-mount batteries that have USB battery banks or USB outputs on them. So yeah, I can't really drive that point home hard enough that just because the one camera doesn't have a battery grip, really, you don't really need to worry about that. So let's see here. Okay, thank you, YouTube. Okay. If you want to develop truly versatile camera, you have to increase stills drive speed with CAF in cameras like the GH6 and reliable PDAF. So far, the GH6 is not enough for action photography. Well, and that's one category. We've never marketed the GH6 as a sports or action stills camera. And that's, I think a lot of times when we look at the logic of, is the camera designed to be best of both worlds? Well, yes, but then you start getting into the specialties. Are you a macro photographer? Are you a sports photographer? Are you a landscape photographer? Are you just a general photographer? Do you do people in portraits and stuff like that? Not to minimize people in portraits as a photography, but they tend to be the most general of the requirements for photography. You need accurate focusing. Typically you don't need ultra fast burst rates for that. Sports and wildlife and, heavy action photography cameras, they typically are very purpose-driven cameras. And when you look at the burst rates of the vast majority of cameras in this category, they're all right around each other, within a couple frames per second with each. But knowing that means that as we look and, you look at future cameras, you want to push the bounds even further, get faster burst rates, get faster focusing systems, things like that. That is what drives the next generation of cameras. And like we said, that's exactly what these streams are about, is all of you have a place to voice these comments on what you want to see in the future for the Lumix cameras. We take them. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be actioned on, but we take all of that into consideration and we bring it to our engineers, to our marketing teams to determine, are these actually areas that, people really, for the vast majority of users, is this really the stuff that people want? And then, you validate that against what in general the market is actually asking for across the board. Is this really matching up to what everybody across the board wants on the camera? And will this actually fit what this camera is designed for? But yeah, so I mean, it's great feedback, wanting faster burst rates and stuff like that. Everyone would love faster burst rates. Not every camera needs to have the fastest burst rate in the market. Rhett says, I find a lot of MFT glass has better sun stars than the S series. Would you agree? Thinking of the 10 to 25 specifically. Not necessarily. Sun stars and the way they look, truthfully, I get that a lot of platforms try to make a big deal out of, this is what a sun star should look like. I would turn that around and say to the user, do you like them? If you like them, why let someone else tell you that it's a good or a bad thing? It's ultimately up to the user. If you know what you like and you know the characteristic that you like out of an image, then that's great. That's exactly what you want. Every lens and every camera is designed to a certain level, and the more aperture blades you have, the more points you get out of it. That kind of stuff. Yeah, there are some technical things that can make them technically better, but I wouldn't agree that Micro Four Thirds has better Sun Stars. I actually really like the Sun Stars we get out of our f1.8 series. But I'm also rarely ever shooting in an environment where that's the focus. And if people are focusing on the Sun Stars, then I took the photo wrong. That's my logic, at least. Let's hear. Rhett also says, I had a talk recently and got lots of feedback about a possible G9 successor. Only just recently did the used price for them start to finally go down. Well, yeah. I mean, the G9's been around for a really long time. Let's see here. Where did that go? G9 is still my favorite. Ergos of any brand on the market. Hopefully the successor keeps the Ergos the same. I believe there has been a dedicated Lumix live stream for Live View Composite. There has been. I can link to that down in the description after the video comes up. But it's always good to go over these points again because not everyone wants to go back through the catalog, all the time. You battery grip for the G9 and never used it. Yeah, that's kind of one of the things. I have battery grips all over the back there, and I use them rarely. When I went on my cross-country trip, Thanksgiving last year, I did use a battery grip because I wanted the extra capacity for it. But 90% of the time, I don't. My battery grips, I have them. I have access to all of them. I rarely ever use them. Let's see here. Let's see here. Totally agreed. All this feature not only for Sean to play with them and show us off on these streams. I'm not sure what that comment's replying to. Okay. Let's hear it. Richard. Thank you, Richard. I definitely appreciate that. Let's see here. Okay. I know the Czech sport action photographer. He's using a 200mm f2.8 on the G9. It can be done, just a cost. We need a 100mm prime, by the way. Yeah, that'd be interesting. FC says, will the future of photography start capturing 3D photos to be used on 3D printers? That would be something. I don't know if you'd be... I mean, yeah, you could probably do something along those lines if you were able to pull depth maps from cameras. But I think it'd be a matter of like what resolution they'd be at. Because what you got to remember is even internally in cameras, when you're looking at a system that's reading the depth map or reading... the information about, depth in an image, they're usually not reading it at the same resolution that you're actually capturing the still at. They're reading it usually at a lower resolution to be able to be done much faster. So I think a huge generational change in processor and underlying core technologies would really have to change to see some stuff like that start to really kind of push into like that kind of next generation. Let's see here. Just got 10 to 25 in your GH6 and you're loving it. Is the mount capable of holding its own weight and not get loose over prolonged usage? Yeah, should be perfectly fine. We've been using them since well before they were launched in trade shows and development periods and stuff. And yeah, all of ours are perfectly fine. Let's see here. GH6 is capable of AFC in 5.8K 30p. It is really hard for me to understand why its drive mode is so limited. I would accept suboptimal AF performance with at least 15 frames per second. So the thing to remember, and we talked about this a couple streams ago, when it comes to burst rates and speeds, in video modes, being able to focus at 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, 240 frames per second, so on and so forth, that's because you're using an image that's it's based in JPEG. It's not RAW. It's not the same bit depth. It's not the same amount of data being recorded per frame. It's much, much less. So that pipeline of images does not require as much processing as a still image does to actually work with. Even your JPEGs at 5.8K, they're 8-bit, they're higher resolution, or for the most part, you typically get higher resolution. The GH6 is an outlier there with the 5.8K. But when you shoot those modes, you can do it in JPEG. You can put the camera into the SH modes and you can shoot at the up to 75 frames per second, but you have a buffer limitation there because the individual file sizes are infinitely larger than what a single frame file size is for the video side. In the photo side, you also have, if you're capturing RAW, you're talking being able to capture an image that's using something like 30 to 50 megabytes per image that has to be processed, stored, and then kept on the buffer before it gets loaded onto the card. So that's where you see a massive difference, why video cameras can shoot really fast frame rates at the same resolutions, but it's not the same. Still images are not chroma subsample. They're not, it's not the same file. It sounds like it is just because of resolution, but they're not. They are totally different objects. I guess is the easiest way to put that. Let's see here. Oh yes, Peter. So autofocus in dimly lit venues. What's the best method? So one of the first things that I typically suggest when you're in a really low light environment with the cameras, make sure you're using either one area or one area plus, depending on the camera you have, because you want to isolate down where you want the focusing to go. If you're using face and eye detection in really low light scenarios, I mean, if it's really, really low light, I typically don't use any detection modes in ultra dim lighting. I go back to just the old way of shooting in low light, which is single point. So I pick that point. I get it where I want to go. AF assist, you can use that if you want. That will do the red light to shine out, which helps with contrast and helps the system find the focus point. But the other thing that you can do is you can creatively get into where find pieces of contrast on a subject when you're shooting in low light. So if I was photographing a black shirt, like this black shirt with the white logo, and it's really, really low light, I'm going to be focusing here. This is what I want to use because it's high contrast and the DFD system can recognize this, and it's going to actually help in that low light scenario. If I was shooting in ultra low light and you've got good definition of like the eyes, using one area, put it on the face, and you'll get a pretty good result there. Continuous focus, I usually don't use continuous focus when I'm shooting at night or any kind of lower light scenario. I use one area, and I use single AF because it's typically faster point to point, even in low light. So that ends up being a big advantage for my low light shooting. Granted, I don't shoot that often in ultra low light, and when I do, it's not in an environment where I'm photographing people. It's usually landscapes, so that's when I flip to manual focus, which is always another really kind of core backup option that you have is flip to manual focus. Depending on the camera you have, if it's a GH6, an S5, any of the modern cameras, you've got linear manual focus, so you're able to just pick a zone and do the zone focusing like we used to. And that's one way to kind of like help speed up some of that process. I know it's probably not exactly what you want to hear, but those are a couple of the things that I use, Peter, for low light shooting. Let's see here. We've got time. Oh, wow. It's already quarter after. I'll take two more questions and then we're going to wrap up for today. Peter says, using a GH6 and G9, 99% for stills. GH6 is great for stills, but precise manual focus is hard with the 6.6 punch in. Is there hardware limitation or could this be fixed by firmware to 20x? We covered this earlier. I honestly don't know what the limitation is, why it's only at 6, other than it's a totally new processor and engine and the way that the image is being processed. This is the first time we've got a camera that can do punch in during video, which not necessarily as new for stills. We've always been able to do that. But given the new hardware change, the fact that it's a totally new platform, some of that stuff just might be that's what we can do right now. And, we're always looking to improve things as we move forward and, kind of adjust the way things are done. So I won't say that it's not possible, but I also won't be able to tell you that it can be fixed with firmware update. I just honestly don't know at this point. But I will be able to ask and check in with the team there. Last question I can take is Trinimedia. Does the S5 have a BSI sensor? Honestly, I don't know. We don't market BSI. So I honestly don't know. I wish I was able to give you an answer for that one, but yeah. So, actually, you know what? I'm going to take one more question. This one's from Media Copycats. How to make separate profiles for both photo and video on the S5. So we're actually going to go to my S5 for this one. I covered this a number of streams ago, but if you want to be able to use your camera back and forth between photo and video, and you want to do it simply by turning the dial on the top to go from the video mode, which I just put it in and I forget what resolution it's at, to the photo mode, and have all of your settings remain independent, you're going to go into the camera menu. You're going to go into, let me turn the display thing on here. So we're going to go on to the photo menu, and then I'm going to go into custom. And then from here, I'm going to go to the first page, and this is on the S5. So I'm going to go on to the first page here. And then I'm going to go and scroll down to Creative Video Combined Set. And I'm going to click into this. And what you do here is you turn all of these icons to the camcorder icon. And what that means now is that your photo setup and your video setup for all the options that you see in the menu here, so your shutter speed, your white balance, photo styles, everything, will now remain separate between the creative video mode and then all of the photography modes on the camera. So now it truly is two separate cameras when it comes to how you've got everything set up. That is probably the easiest way for you. Who asked that question? Media Copycat. That's how you would set that up. So hopefully that helps. And yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, cool. Looks pretty good. So, with that, thank you everybody so much. This was a fun conversation, minus all the random bots. This is, I think, like the third time we've had that happen, and it's always random. So thanks for bearing with me on that side. And yeah, hopefully y'all learned something and you picked up some new information. Everybody, it was awesome, all the comments and feedback that everyone's given on the cameras here. So definitely keep that stuff coming. If you've got additional recommendations or you've got topics for streams that you want to have us cover in the future, tag us in either social media platforms. Instagram's the primary one that we're monitoring these days. Or you can send them to us in an email at lumixlive@us.panasonic.com. That email address will be up on the end card, as well as it'll also be down in the description. So feel free to drop us an email there. And yeah, we'll be back live next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for another Lumix Live. If you liked this video, if you got something cool out of it, or you think that you know someone who may benefit from watching these streams, give us a like, share the video to people that you think would like these broadcasts or maybe would want to be part of them. That helps us out as a community as a whole. And yeah, outside of that, have an awesome day. I hope everyone has a great weekend. And yeah, we'll see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So take care, everyone. Later.